In 1912, Winston Churchill, then serving as First Lord of the Admiralty, introduced a bold proposal for the federalization of the United Kingdom, moving away from the established unitary state constitutional and parliamentary monarchy and moving towards a system that would be more similar to what the US have. In case you don't know, federalism is a political concept that involves the division of powers between a central government and regional governments. It allows regions to have control over certain areas of policy, while the central government retains authority over issues of national importance, usually diplomacy and security. This structure can help accommodate diverse regional identities and needs within a single political entity, promoting unity while respecting local autonomy at the same time. At least its defenders would say so. Now, don't get this wrong, Churchill was an aristocrat that very much favored the monarchy, and his proposal wasn't in any way to get rid of it. This proposal only aimed to reorganize the political management of the British territory in order to, according to him, create a more balanced and cohesive political system by granting significant autonomy to England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, while maintaining the integrity of the United Kingdom through a minimal central government, which also went towards his beliefs since at the time he was a member of the Liberal Party. In this video, we're going to find out about Winston Churchill's arguably crazy idea for a British Federation in the year of 1912. First, some historical context. The early 20th century was a period of significant political and social change within the United Kingdom. The country was grappling with various issues, including the demands for home rule in Ireland, the rise of labor movements, and the ongoing debates about women's suffrage. The Liberal government, in power since 1906, was implementing a range of progressive social reforms, but also faced substantial political challenges connected to these and other issues. Ireland was particularly contentious, at the time still being entirely under British rule. The demand for Irish home rule, which sought to grant Ireland its own parliament and greater autonomy, had been a divisive issue for years. And in 1912, the Third Home Rule Bill was introduced, aiming to establish self-government for Ireland within the UK. However, this move was met with fierce resistance from Unionists in Ulster and the Conservative Party, who feared that it would lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom. The government was stuck between a rock and a hard place. The degree of home rule it granted was never enough for the Irish Free State supporters, and it was always too much for the Unionists. Churchill's federalization plan was influenced by these ongoing debates about home rule and the broader challenges of managing a diverse and multinational state, which they were realizing Britain was. He proposed the creation of regional assemblies for Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and several regions of England. These assemblies would handle local matters, while the central government in Westminster would retain control over national issues such as defense, foreign policy, and general economic policy. He argued that federalization would provide a balanced solution to the demands for regional autonomy and the need to maintain national unity. By granting self-governing powers to each part of the UK, Churchill believed that the federal structure could address regional grievances and aspirations more effectively than the existing unitary system. His proposal aimed to find a solution that would be entirely different and thus acceptable for both sides in Ireland, but also reaping the benefits of avoiding future Scottish and Welsh separatism, in addition to providing adequate representation to the English themselves, which were often overlooked since the only parliament they have is the British one, which deals with the issues of the whole UK and not necessarily dedicating time to their own. An article from a newspaper at the time wrote about the speech he made on this in his constituency of Dundee in 1912. Speaking at a meeting organized by the Dundee Women's Liberal Federation on Thursday, Mr. Churchill, remarking that he spoke for himself and not the government, admitted that the resistance of Ulster to home rule was a very formidable obstacle, and went on to sketch a plan for a complete system of federalism in Great Britain, Lancashire, Yorkshire, the Midlands, London, and other districts would all have their separate parliaments, which makes us realize that his plan wasn't just for 4 separate parliaments to exist with more autonomy, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England, but for various regions to become their own states with their own parliaments too. One can speculate that Scotland would have 1 or 2, Wales maybe just 1, Ireland being divided into North and South would make sense, and England into some main regions like the Midlands, Yorkshire, Lancashire, perhaps Cornwall, and then London, grouping up the areas around it. And we're left to wonder what would be the case for other territories like the Isle of Man, Jersey, and the other Channel Islands, and even what his plan was for British colonial territories at the time. Should the plan have been followed, perhaps other British controlled regions across the world could have joined the Federation, like Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, avoiding the total collapse of the British Empire a few decades later and allowing them to have an even closer connection and relationship today. Now, his idea wasn't as crazy as the title of this video makes it seem. After all, its adoption would have potentially avoided all the violent disputes in Ireland. It could have prevented Scottish separatism that led almost half the population to vote for it in a referendum and put a stop to the current rise of Welsh separatism as well. However, others at the time did think it was kind of crazy. Churchill's federalization proposal faced significant opposition from various quarters of the British political spectrum. The Conservative Party and many Unionists were completely against any form of home rule or federalization, fearing it would lead to the disintegration of the UK. They argued that granting autonomy to regions like Ireland would set a precedent that could encourage separatist movements in other parts of the country. They didn't see federalism as an alternative to dissolution of the Union. They saw it as a stepping stone or an accelerator to it. Newspaper reactions to Churchill's plan were also largely negative. An article in the New York Times on September 15, 1912 reported that almost all the major London papers attacked the Federation plan. In an article from that year, the New York Times also wrote, Winston Churchill prognosticated a policy of federation for Great Britain in a speech at Dundee this week, which, to say the least, has drawn attention from the Liberal defeat at Midlothian, an election they had lost in another place. One could argue from this comment that his plan wasn't serious and simply an attempted distraction from something else negative for the party, but that's just me speculating. The implementation of Churchill's federalization plan would have had far-reaching consequences for the political and social structure of the UK, some potentially positive and some negative. First, it could in fact alleviate regional tensions and the push for full independence, particularly in Ireland. Regional governments would have been better positioned to address local issues and reflect the unique identities and interests of their populations. Churchill's proposal aimed to strengthen the unity of the UK by providing a more balanced and inclusive political structure. By recognizing and accommodating regional diversity, the federal system could foster a greater sense of belonging and loyalty to the UK as a whole. It could have also enhanced democratic participation. Decentralizing power to regional assemblies would have brought government closer to the people. Citizens would have had greater influence over local policies and decisions that directly affected their lives. From a more negative perspective, critics of the plan argued that federalization could lead to increased complexity and administrative costs. Establishing and maintaining multiple regional assemblies would require significant resources, and there was potential for conflict and duplication of efforts between regional and national authorities. There were also concerns that federalization could weaken the central authority of the UK government. Balancing the powers of regional assemblies with those of Westminster would require careful management to ensure that the central government retained its ability to govern effectively on a national level. And if there wasn't a full separation of areas to govern, if the local parliaments decided one thing and the central government another, the conflicts could even be increased rather than alleviated. But the truth is, it seems that after the speech, Churchill didn't give much more thought to the concept of creating a British Federation. Perhaps the total opposition to his plan made him reconsider pursuing it. While Churchill's federalization did not gain the necessary political support to be implemented at the time, the idea of devolving power to regional governments continued to evolve in the UK. The concept of home rule eventually led to the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922, In the 1990s, the UK saw significant moves towards devolution with the establishment of the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and the Northern Ireland Assembly. These devolved institutions were granted varying degrees of legislative power, reflecting some aspects of Churchill's federalization vision, only with a different name. The devolution process aimed to provide regions with greater autonomy while maintaining the overall unity of the UK, which is what he wanted. The only missing aspect were the regional parliaments within England. In summary, the idea of federalism in the UK didn't start with Churchill. It had first been proposed in the 1870s by Isaac Butt and his Home Rule Party, and also by Joseph Chamberlain, a radical liberal in the mid-1880s. And it also didn't die with Churchill's resignation on the issue. David Lloyd George, British Prime Minister from 1916 to 1922, campaigned for Welsh devolution, beginning with the devolution of the church in Wales, which finally came about in 1920, feeling that disestablishment, land reform, and other forms of devolution could only be achieved if Wales formed its own government within a federal imperial system. While changing the term from federalism to devolution, many political groups and figures have also fought for these ideas since then and up to today. The modern Liberal Democrat Party in the UK has since 2014 been committed to a set of policies you could very well define as federalism. In 2021, calling for regional parliaments throughout England whose powers would approach those of the Scottish one, and with the House of Lords to be replaced by a federal Senate with representatives from each region. So, even though Churchill failed to convince the country of his idea in 1912, the idea has lived on, and one is left to wonder if one day in the future we will end up with a true British Federation only over 100 years after it was proposed. What do you think? Would you like this to happen, and which states would you want to exist within it? Let me know in the comments. Thank you to my patrons for supporting me directly. If you want to join our community of over 100 people, you will have access to early videos, extra content, live streams, and direct contact with me. Remember to subscribe here as well, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.